going, and then make sure I got everybody muted. Okay, there we go. Okay, I think we're good now. So I wanted to take another look at forgiveness, what the Buddha had to say about it, how it fits into our path in general, and really try to address the question of can we really make progress on our path without forgiveness, without practicing both toward ourselves and toward others, and sort of take a look this morning at where it fits into our path. And here we're talking about both seeking forgiveness or obtaining forgiveness, and then forgiving others. The Pali word for forgiveness is kama, which also means the earth, and I think that's an interesting translation. But when we forgive someone for causing us harm, we're making a choice not to retaliate, not to strike back. We talked a little bit about this on Wednesday, and not to seek some kind of revenge. Now, forgiving me if I've transgressed does not mean you have to like me. You don't have to make me your friend. In fact, you don't even necessarily have to tell me that you've forgiven me. I mean, we'll get into the nuances of that because it's really about what's going on in my heart, in your heart when you forgive someone, and letting go of that resentment, letting go of that hurt. And whether you tell the other person is almost secondary to that act. Because what we're talking about here is unburdening ourselves of the weight of resentment. I mean, we carry that stuff around and it just weighs us down. I don't. This is attributed to the Buddha. I don't know if he said it or not, but I love the quote. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else, but you're the one who gets burned. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else, but you're the one that gets burned. I think it really sums up what I was saying about the weight of that resentment. With forgiveness, again, whether we express it outwardly or just make it an internal thing, breaks the cycle of retribution that can just keep us into an escalating battle with someone. Reconciliation is a return to some kind of cordiality. It requires more than forgiveness. It requires the reestablishing of trust if we're going to communicate that forgiveness or we're going to receive it with an open heart. But let's be clear, that's not always possible. I mean, it depends on who we're dealing with. If I deny responsibility for my actions, if I blame you for why I did something, or if I maintain I did no wrong, then there's no room for us to reconcile. And similarly, if I insist your feelings don't matter, if I devalue your feelings or dismiss your feelings, there's no room for reconciliation. You have, the fact is you have no right to hold me to your standards of right and wrong, because being hurt or being insulted or whatever is in the eye of the beholder. In other words, it's not up to you if you've offended me to be the arbiter of whether that was truly offensive. I'm the one that makes that decision as the recipient. And in any of those cases, there can be no reconciliation. So to reestablish the connection, to reestablish trust, I first must admit that I've hurt you, that I was wrong to do so, and that I will try to exercise restraint in the future and not do it again. And at the same time, we have to inspire trust in a respectful way and assure you that my reconciliation or efforts at that are genuine, not just window dressing. Because only then, when both parties are involved, can the relationship regain some sort of a solid footing. To encourage right reconciliation among his followers, the Buddha detailed the methods for achieving it. He was fairly specific about this. He said that our culture of values, which he taught, is really putting these methods to use. So to briefly summarize the instructions that he gave to his community, they are as follows. The first step, he said, is an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. He said, when a monk confesses an offense, such as having insulted another monk, he first admits to having said the insult. So the first step is we have to own our mistake, own what we did that was hurtful to the other person. And then I have to agree that it was indeed an offense, that it wasn't just a casual remark or an off the cuff remark. Yes, I own the fact that it was an offense. And then thirdly, I have to promise to restrain myself from repeating the offense in the future. And that's how he would bring the monks together to bridge these schisms when there would be a dispute within his community. And then he went on to say that a monk seeking a reconciliation with a layperson or two laypersons with each other follows the same pattern. Both sides confess wrongdoing and promise not to dig up each other's minor offenses. You know how when we say, "Oh, you hurt my feelings," and someone said, "Oh yeah, but you did this to me," the tit for tat thing. So that's a non-starter in terms of the Buddha's paradigm for a reconciliation. Because what that does, once we interrupt that tit for tat thing, it frees us up to focus on the wrongdoing that caused or exacerbated the dispute. Okay. Because genuine reconciliation is not just based on a desire for harmony, there has to be active steps. It requires a mutual understanding of the actions that created the disharmony and a promise to avoid those actions in the future. It requires a clearly articulated understanding and agreement and commitment to, and this is really important, mutual standards of right and wrong. What's harmful, what's wholesome. Okay, there has to be an agreement there. You can't have two different standards of what constitutes an unwholesome act. And at the end of the day, true forgiveness and reconciliation is not about winning or losing the argument. We have to let go of that need to win. Okay, the Buddha clearly recognizes that each party has to accept responsibility for their role. And we don't like to do that. We like to blame the other person. Oh, you made me do it. We talked about that a little bit on Wednesday. This is a quote from Philip Moffat, the teacher out at Spirit Rock. He says, quote, "There is one other hindrance to the practice of forgiveness you need to examine. This is the fear that if you forgive, the story of your loss will be forgotten. This is such a painful misunderstanding and it is widespread. But forgiveness will not cost you your story. By forgiving, you separate the act from the flawed human being behind it. Trust yourself to open to forgiveness. Believe that you can redeem horrible acts with your own vulnerability," close quotes. So our motivation here should be for compassion, the welfare of both parties or all parties involved, the desire to see the wrongdoer rehabilitated, together with a desire to hold to fair principles of right and wrong that are mutually agreed upon. And the result is we set down the burden of suffering that is caused by holding on to this stuff. I know this well in my own life. You just carry it around, you ruminate about it, we wring our hands about it, we obsess about it, we just don't let it go. And it's suffering. So the Buddha praised the honest acceptance of blame as an honorable act, not a shameful act. Sometimes when we accept the blame, we think we're giving something away, or it's shameful. We're admitting that we're defective or flawed or we misbehaved, and we hate that. But he's saying, no, it's an honorable act to acknowledge that. It shows real progress on our path, because doing that is not just a means, but it is the means, according to the Buddha, for progress in spiritual practice, owning up to our mistakes in that sense. As the Buddha told his son Rahula, the ability to recognize one's mistakes and admit them to others is an essential factor in achieving purity in thought, word, and deed. I mean, that's how much importance he put upon it. He said that it is that essential to achieving purity in thought, word, and deed, owning up to and admitting our mistakes. Gandhi said, quote, "The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong." Again, from Gandhi, the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. Now, notwithstanding everything that I've just said, we have to accept that some, not all disputes can be reconciled. If both parties aren't in agreement to do that, it's not going to happen. If one or both parties are unwilling or unable to exercise the skill set that I just described to achieve true reconciliation, it's not going to happen. But even if reconciliation cannot occur, there's still an opportunity for us to forgive the other person and not carry around that burden. This is why the distinction between reconciliation and forgiveness is so important. They are not the same. Forgiveness can happen unilaterally. I can forgive you, even if you aren't willing to meet me halfway and unburden myself. You know, that sutta I referred to on Wednesday, where the man comes and says to the Buddha, "I'm angry with you," and the Buddha says, "Well, you know, I'm not willing to accept it, so go on your way. You know, I'm not willing to take your anger on." It encourages us. This distinction between reconciliation and forgiveness encourages us not to settle only for forgiveness, though, when we see the genuine possibility for reconciliation. In other words, if we can achieve reconciliation, that's the preferred outcome. But if we can't, we still can fall back on forgiveness. We can always forgive without the involvement of the other party. Okay, in the Dhammapada, the Buddha gives an instruction that I think is both fierce and compassionate. He says, and this is pretty strong, and you may have heard this quote. He says, quote, "If someone has abused you, beat you, robbed you, abandon your thoughts of anger. Soon you will die. Life is too short to live with hatred." I mean, he says if they abuse you, beat you, rob you, let it go. I mean, that's a pretty tall order. This from the late South African Bishop Desmond Tutu. He says, quote, "Forgive others, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve peace." Not because they deserve forgiveness. And this is a man who witnessed unspeakable violence against the Black population of South Africa. But at the end of the day, he pushed for the truth and reconciliation process after apartheid because he understood that the only way that his community was going to have peace was to forgive. You know, this forgiveness thing, it runs through all faith traditions. I mean, it is a foundational practice because it is the antidote to conflict and continuing conflict. I mean, look at what's going on in Gaza and the Middle East. There is no forgiveness. There's tit for tat, tit for tat. I kill you, you kill me. It's just endless. And it just never stops. So let's look at just a couple of other barriers other than denial, which is one certainly, that prevent us from forgiving others or asking others to forgive us. And it's the primary obstacle or set of obstacles is when we are unwilling to let go of our hurt, our resentment, our anger, and when we feel we are right and we feel we have the high moral ground. And guess where all that's coming from? Our old friend, the ego. Can't let it go. I'm going to hold on to it. I'm going to wear it like a badge of honor. You know, I wear my resentments like a badge of honor as though that's the high moral ground. Because we fail to recognize that we practice forgiveness for our own sake, not to be locked in hate, not to be locked in fear and resentment. We do it for ourselves to relieve ourselves of this burden. You know, it's the fear I think some of us unconsciously carry. And if we forgive others, it means we've somehow let them off the hook or we approve of their behavior, which is not the case. You know, we fail to see that forgiveness opens our hearts. Holding on to resentment contracts us. It contracts our hearts. You know, when I was working in my professional life with survivors of sexual abuse, they would always say that to forgive the perpetrator was letting them off the hook. But they were never free of that hate and resentment. It wasn't to de-emphasize the significance and the horror of the abuse, but it was to give them a certain amount of freedom from the added burden. The burden of the abuse was enough. To add the burden of continuing to carry around that hatred was just sinking them. Remember that the Buddha taught that hate never dispels hate, only love dispels hate, which is why forgiveness practice is so important. So let me stop there.